The Vorthak Empire believed they had created the perfect weapon to destroy humanity. For 30 long years, their best scientists worked in secret laboratories, mixing the DNA of 7 different alien warrior races. They called their creation the Apex Legion, super soldiers designed to beat humans at their own game of war. Admiral Kethvor walked slowly around the huge blue hologram that showed all of Earth's outer space colonies. His insect-like mouth parts clicked together as he smiled with evil satisfaction. The other alien commanders watched him carefully as he pointed at different human worlds with his clawed finger. "Look at these pathetic humans," Kethvor said in his harsh, scratchy voice. "They fight like wild animals. No planning, no thinking, just anger and violence. They charge forward and hope for the best. Our perfect Legion soldiers will crush them one planet at a time." The War Council nodded their agreement. They had studied human battles for decades. Humans seemed to rely only on raw emotion and brutal force. The aliens believed their scientifically enhanced warriors would easily defeat such primitive tactics. The first attacks proved the Admiral right, or so it seemed. Human military bases across 3 different star systems fell in just a few hours. The defenders never had a chance against enemies who moved like ghosts in the night and struck with deadly accuracy. The Apex Legion soldiers were faster, stronger, and smarter than any human soldier. Their enhanced senses could see in complete darkness and hear heartbeats from 50 meters away. Far from the burning military outposts, on a peaceful farming world called New Sol, life continued as normal. The colonists grew rice and vegetables in endless green fields under a warm yellow sun. Most of them had never seen real combat and hoped they never would. Kim Day knelt between rows of tomato plants, carefully checking each one for signs of disease or pest damage. His weathered hands moved with practiced skill as he tied growing vines to wooden stakes. Sweat dripped from his forehead in the afternoon heat, but he worked steadily without complaint. He had been farming this same plot of land for 15 years, ever since he retired from his previous life. The other colonists knew Day as a quiet, helpful neighbor who kept mostly to himself. When their farming equipment broke down, he could fix almost anything. When storms damaged their crops, he shared his surplus food without asking for payment. He spoke little about his past, and most people assumed he had always been a farmer. They were completely wrong. Kim Day had spent 25 years as a United Earth Marine, fighting in some of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. He had earned more medals for bravery than any other non-commissioned officer in the Corps. His real rank had been Sergeant Major, and he had led men through battles that most people only heard about in whispered stories. But those days were supposed to be over. Day had buried his weapons, his armor, and his memories beneath the old red barn on his property. He wanted nothing more than to grow food and live in peace for the rest of his days. That peaceful dream shattered when the emergency broadcasts began. Day was repairing a water pump when his handheld radio crackled to life. The voice of the colonial administrator sounded tense and frightened as he read reports from the outer systems. Military bases destroyed, colonies under attack, enemy forces moving toward the core worlds. Most of the other farmers who heard the broadcast shook their heads sadly but continued their work. The fighting was happening light years away. It had nothing to do with their quiet agricultural world. The government would handle it, just like they always did. But as Day listened to the tactical details, his trained mind began to see patterns that chilled his soul. The attacks were not random raids by desperate pirates or territorial disputes between rival factions. Someone had studied human military doctrine very carefully and was systematically destroying key strategic targets. The enemy knew exactly where to hit and when to hit it. They understood human supply chains, communication networks, and defensive strategies better than most human generals did. This was not the work of mindless aliens. This was a carefully planned invasion by a highly intelligent enemy. Day set down his tools and walked slowly toward his farmhouse. His steps were steady, but inside his chest, his heart was beating faster. He had hoped never to feel this particular combination of fear and anticipation again. It was the feeling every soldier knew, the moment when peaceful life ended and war began. The sun was setting behind the mountains when Day saw the first alien dropships entering the atmosphere. They looked like burning stars falling from the darkening sky, but he knew better. Each streak of light carried dozens of enemy soldiers equipped with weapons and technology far beyond anything the local colonial militia possessed. His neighbors stood in their doorways and pointed at the pretty lights in the sky. Some of them took pictures with their communication devices. They had no idea they were watching their own deaths approaching. Day walked to the old barn behind his house and began digging in the northeast corner, exactly 2 meters from the wall. His shovel struck metal after only a few minutes of digging. The waterproof container looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago when he buried it. Inside were things he had hoped never to touch again: his combat uniform, his personal weapons, field equipment, and encrypted communication devices that could contact military networks across human space. As he lifted his old rifle from the container, Dave felt the weight of more than just metal and plastic. He was picking up a life he had tried to leave behind forever. The war was supposed to be over for Kim Day. But as alien ships landed in the fields where he had grown food to feed families, he realized that some wars never truly end. They just wait quietly until they are needed again. The alien dropships landed in perfect formation across New Seoul's main settlement. Colonel Vrexton watched his Apex Legion soldiers move like deadly shadows through the streets, securing every important building within 10 minutes. Their enhanced bodies allowed them to leap over obstacles that would stop normal soldiers, and their improved senses detected even the smallest movements from hiding civilians. The spaceport fell first, then the communication center, followed by the power station and water treatment plant. Each target was taken with surgical precision. The Legion soldiers moved in coordinated groups of 6, covering each other's movements and eliminating any resistance before it could organize. Colonel Vrexton stood on the roof of the tallest building in town, using his enhanced vision to survey the conquered settlement. His large eyes could see much further than human eyes, and built-in computers in his brain calculated distances and threat levels automatically. Everything looked exactly as their intelligence reports had predicted. Scattered houses and farms spread out from the central town in all directions. Panicked humans ran through the streets carrying their children and whatever belongings they could grab. Some tried to reach vehicles, but the Legion had disabled all transportation within the first 5 minutes of landing. A few brave colonists attempted to organize some kind of defense, but they had only hunting rifles and farming tools against enemies who could dodge bullets and punch through steel doors. Another perfect victory, Vrexton reported to Admiral Kethvor through his communication implant. The humans are behaving exactly as predicted. They panic, they run, they make emotional decisions. We will have complete control within 6 hours. What the alien commander could not see was Kim Day, crouched in a thick patch of bushes exactly 3 kilometers from the town center. The old Marine held a pair of military binoculars that he had kept clean and functional for 20 years. Through the powerful lenses, he watched every move the aliens made. Day had been studying the enemy for 40 minutes now, taking mental notes about their tactics and behavior. These soldiers were impressive, more skilled than any human forces he had ever fought against. They moved with perfect coordination, communicated through silent signals, and showed no signs of fatigue or fear. But as he watched longer, a small smile began to form on Day's weathered face. The aliens were good, perhaps the best soldiers he had ever seen. But they fought like computers following a program. Every squad moved in the same formation. Every building was searched using the same pattern. Every security checkpoint was established at mathematically precise distances. They were perfect soldiers executing a perfect plan. And that perfection was going to get them killed. Day had learned something important during his 25 years of combat experience. The most dangerous enemy was not the one who screamed war cries and charged forward with guns blazing. Movies and stories liked to show heroes fighting that way, but real warriors knew better. The truly deadly fighter was the one who stayed quiet, watched carefully, and struck only when the time was exactly right. While the other colonists fled toward the evacuation points that had been established years ago for emergencies, Day moved in the opposite direction. The aliens would expect humans to run toward those safe areas, and they were probably already setting up ambushes along those routes. Instead, the old Marine slipped away into the wilderness that surrounded the settlement. For 15 years, Day had walked through these forests and hills almost every day. He knew which paths were hidden from aerial observation, which caves stayed dry during the rainy season, and which streams could be crossed without leaving footprints. The landscape was as familiar to him as the rooms of his own house. The Legion had studied human military tactics, but they had not studied Kim Day. Night fell over New Seoul like a thick black blanket. The aliens had excellent night vision, but they were patrolling areas they had never seen before, following maps instead of personal knowledge. Their enhanced senses could detect movement and heat signatures, but they could not tell the difference between a hiding enemy and the dozens of native animals that lived in the forests. Squad 7 was conducting a routine security patrol along the northern perimeter when they simply vanished. At 2,347 hours, the squad leader made his regular check-in report. At 0015 hours, when the next report was due, there was only silence. Colonel Vrexton sent a search team to investigate. They found 6 sets of empty armor scattered across a small clearing, the high-tech suits intact but the soldiers gone. Weapons lay on the ground as if they had been carefully placed there. There were no signs of struggle, no blast marks from energy weapons, no blood or bodies. It was as if the soldiers had simply evaporated into thin air. The colonel increased security protocols immediately. Patrols were doubled, communication check-ins were required every 15 minutes, and no soldier was allowed to move alone. But by dawn, 2 more squads had disappeared in exactly the same mysterious way. Miles away, in a cave that did not appear on any colonial survey maps, Day examined the alien equipment he had captured. The weapons were incredibly advanced, using energy cells that could fire hundreds of shots without reloading. The armor was made from materials that could stop bullets and absorb impacts that would crush normal protective gear. But as he studied the technology more carefully, Day began to understand the alien's weakness. Every piece of equipment had been designed to fight against conventional human military forces. The weapons were programmed to target soldiers wearing standard combat armor. The armor was built to resist the types of bullets and explosives used by human armies. The aliens had spent 30 years preparing to fight the United Earth Marine Corps, orbital bombardment fleets, and massive tank formations. They had not prepared to fight one old farmer who understood that the best battle was the one your enemy never saw coming. Day smiled as he began to plan his next move. 3 days had passed since the Apex Legion landed on New Sol, and Colonel Vrexton should have been celebrating complete victory. His enhanced soldiers controlled the spaceport, the communication towers, the power plants, and every other important building in the settlement. The human colonists had either fled or been captured. By all military standards, the invasion was a total success. But the alien commander felt no satisfaction as he reviewed the daily reports. Something was going terribly wrong, and he could not understand what it was. "Sir, the Eastern Patrol reports another communication failure," his aide announced nervously. "That makes 7 units with equipment problems today." Vrexton's mandibles clicked together in frustration. The Legion's technology was supposed to be flawless. Every weapon, every piece of armor, every communication device had been tested thousands of times before the invasion. Yet somehow, critical equipment kept breaking down at the worst possible moments. "What about the supply convoy from the landing zone?" the colonel asked. "It arrived on schedule, sir, but half the energy cells were missing. The transport crew claims they loaded everything correctly, but the cargo containers were nearly empty when they reached us." The colonel's enhanced brain ran through dozens of possible explanations. Equipment theft required organized resistance, but their sensors showed no large groups of humans moving through the area. Sabotage required technical knowledge that simple farmers should not possess. Yet somehow, their perfect military machine was being slowly dismantled by invisible enemies. The captured human prisoners were no help at all. When questioned about organized resistance groups, they just stared with wide, frightened eyes and spoke of strange stories. They whispered about a ghost that moved through the forests around the settlement. Some claimed to have seen shadows moving in impossible ways. Others insisted that the very landscape itself had turned against the invaders. Colonel Vrexton dismissed such tales as primitive superstition. His species had evolved beyond belief in supernatural nonsense. There had to be a logical explanation for their problems. What he did not know was that 15 kilometers away, in a cave system that appeared on no colonial maps, Lee Minute was coordinating the most effective resistance network New Sol had ever seen. Before the invasion, Lee Minute had worked as the colony's logistics coordinator, managing supply shipments and resource distribution for 8,000 people. Her job required her to know every detail about how goods moved from place to place, how communication networks functioned, and how to organize complex operations involving dozens of people. Now she used those same skills for a very different purpose. "Park Soon should be back from his scouting run soon," she whispered to the 23 colonists huddled in the cave with her. These were not the strongest or bravest people in the settlement. They were ordinary farmers, teachers, mechanics, and shop owners who had refused to abandon their home when the evacuation order came. Under Kim Day's patient guidance, these frightened civilians had transformed into something the aliens never expected to face. They could not fight Legion soldiers in direct combat, but they could watch, listen, and report everything they observed. The network operated through a system so simple that the aliens' sophisticated monitoring equipment could not detect it. Hand signals passed between farmers working in distant fields. Messages hidden in marked stones left along walking paths. Information shared through the timing of when kitchen lights were turned on and off. Park soon crept through the cave entrance just as the sun was setting outside. The middle-aged mechanic had volunteered for the dangerous job of getting close enough to the alien positions to observe their activities. His mechanical knowledge helped him understand how their equipment worked, and his small size allowed him to hide in places where larger people could not fit. "They think we're just helpless farmers," he whispered excitedly to the group. I watched them all afternoon, and they don't even bother posting guards at their main supply depot. They act like there's no possible threat from anyone on this planet. Lee Minute smiled grimly. The aliens' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They were so genetically perfect, so technologically advanced, that they could not imagine being threatened by inferior humans. That night, the alien supply depot exploded in a brilliant flash of light that could be seen from orbit. Emergency teams rushed to investigate, expecting to find evidence of planted explosives or terrorist attacks. Instead, they discovered that the blast had been caused by the aliens' own equipment malfunctioning in a spectacular chain reaction. The investigation concluded that a programming error in the energy storage system had caused a catastrophic overload. It was an unfortunate accident, but these things happen sometimes with complex technology. The same accident happened again the next night at a different location. And the night after that, another critical system failed at exactly the wrong moment. Kim Dae had spent countless hours studying the captured alien technology, learning to understand their programming languages and control systems. The aliens had designed their equipment to be foolproof, but they had not made it day-proof. With careful modifications that looked like random glitches, he could turn their own tools into weapons against them. Each explosion, each system failure, each mysterious equipment breakdown looked like a coincidence. But taken together, they represented something that terrified Colonel Vrexton more than any direct military assault could have. His perfect soldiers were being defeated by an enemy they could not see, understand, or fight. When Admiral Kethvor's battle cruiser arrived in orbit around New Sol, it represented the ultimate admission of failure. The Legion had been designed to conquer human worlds quickly and efficiently. They should not have needed reinforcements to deal with a minor agricultural settlement. But as the Admiral reviewed the reports from the surface, he began to understand what his field commander was facing. Somewhere in the hills around the colony, a single human was teaching an entire alien army a lesson they had never learned in their sterile laboratories. Perfection in war meant nothing without the ability to adapt to unexpected situations. And humans, it seemed, were extraordinarily good at adapting to anything. Admiral Kethvor stared at the holographic display showing New Sol from orbit, his patience finally exhausted. For 6 days, his perfect Apex Legion had been humiliated by invisible enemies who struck without warning and vanished like smoke. Enough was enough. Begin orbital bombardment, he commanded his weapons officer. Target grid sections Alpha through Omega. I want every possible hiding place turned into ash. The alien battlecruiser's massive energy cannons swiveled toward the planet's surface. Each weapon contained enough destructive power to level an entire city block. If ground forces could not find the resistance fighters, then he would simply eliminate every place they could possibly hide. The bombardment began at sunrise, lighting up the morning sky with brilliant flashes of deadly energy. Systematic and methodical, the alien weapons swept across the countryside in perfect geometric patterns. Ancient forests that had stood for centuries vanished in seconds. Rolling hills were flattened into smoking craters. Streams and rivers boiled away into steam. Deep beneath the surface, in cave networks that had been carved by underground rivers millions of years ago, Kim Dae watched the destruction through small periscope devices he had built using salvaged alien technology and mirrors from abandoned houses. Each blast sent shock waves through the rock around them, making dust fall from the cave ceiling and causing everyone to cover their ears. Dae felt every impact like a punch to his heart. This beautiful world had been his home for 15 years. He had walked through those forests every morning, fished in those streams, and watched sunsets from those hills. Now it was all being destroyed by enemies who saw it as nothing more than terrain to be cleared. But even as he grieved for his lost home, the old Marine's tactical mind was working. He studied the bombardment pattern through his makeshift periscopes, timing each blast and mapping the destruction zone. After 2 hours of observation, he began to smile grimly. "They are still thinking like machines," he explained to Lee Minute and the other survivors huddled in the main cavern. "Look at this pattern. Every blast is exactly 500 meters from the last one. They are bombing in perfect mathematical grids, just like their computers calculated would be most efficient." Lee Minute studied the rough map Dae had drawn on the cave wall. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they'll have to send ground teams to inspect the damage," Dae replied. "Their commanders will want proof that they killed all the resistance fighters. They'll need to search through the ruins to look for bodies and check that every hiding place was destroyed. That's when they'll be most vulnerable." Over the next 3 days, as the bombardment continued, Dae began the most important teaching of his life. The 23 colonists who had survived the initial invasion were about to receive an education in warfare that no military academy could provide. Park Soon, who had spent his career maintaining farming equipment and water pumps, learned to hack into alien communication systems using techniques that combined his engineering knowledge with captured enemy technology. Within hours, he could intercept their radio messages and even send false reports that confused their coordination. Choi Yu had been a school teacher before the invasion, specializing in chemistry and biology. Now she studied the alien energy cells with the same careful attention she had once given to lesson plans. Using her chemistry textbooks and improvised laboratory equipment, she learned to create explosive devices that were far more powerful than anything the aliens expected simple farmers to possess. Kim Bo, a restaurant cook, discovered he had a natural talent for creating traps and ambushes. His years of precise timing in the kitchen translated perfectly to the timing required for military operations. He could coordinate complex attacks involving multiple people with the same skill he had once used to serve meals to large groups. Each colonist found abilities they never knew they had, guided by days' patient instruction in the ancient art of making war with whatever materials were available. They learned to turn farming tools into weapons, household chemicals into explosives, and ordinary objects into sophisticated surveillance equipment. Most importantly, they learned to think like humans instead of machines. Where the aliens relied on predetermined strategies and perfect execution, the colonists learned to improvise, adapt, and change their tactics based on whatever situation they encountered. The psychological effect on the Apex Legion was more devastating than any orbital bombardment could have been. These genetically perfect soldiers had been bred and trained for victory in conventional warfare. They had enhanced reflexes, superior strength, advanced weapons, and tactical programming that covered every scenario their creators could imagine. But they had never been prepared to fight an enemy that refused to follow any rules they understood. The colonists struck without warning from unexpected directions, used weapons that shouldn't exist, and employed tactics that made no logical sense according to alien military doctrine. Legion soldiers who had never known fear began jumping at shadows. Warriors who had been programmed for perfect coordination started making nervous mistakes. The stress of fighting an incomprehensible enemy began to break down their enhanced mental conditioning. Squad leaders reported seeing movement where their senses detected nothing. Patrols returned early because they heard sounds that turned out to be wind blowing through the ruins of bombed buildings. Equipment failures continued to plague their operations, but now the soldiers suspected sabotage in every malfunction. Admiral Kethvor watched his perfect army slowly crumble from his command ship in orbit. His scientists had spent decades creating the ultimate warriors, but they had made one critical mistake. They had tried to eliminate every human weakness without understanding that those same weaknesses were often sources of incredible strength. The stubborn refusal to accept defeat when defeat seemed certain. The ability to find hope in situations where hope appeared impossible. The talent for turning any available tool into a weapon when survival was at stake. These were not flaws in human nature, they were features that made humans the most dangerous opponents in the galaxy. Too late, the Admiral realized they were not just fighting human soldiers. They were fighting human nature itself. The final battle began in a way that Admiral Kethvor never expected. After 10 days of hunting invisible enemies through bombed ruins, he assumed the human resistance leader would eventually be forced into a desperate last stand. Every military textbook in the galaxy said that cornered enemies always fought the same way, with fury and desperation in a final bloody confrontation. Kim Dae had other plans. At exactly noon on the 11th day, every communication device in the alien fleet received the same message. It came through their own secure channels, using their own encryption codes. Somehow, the human had gained complete access to their most protected systems. Admiral Kethvor, Dae's calm voice echoed through the command ship speakers, "I am waiting for you at the agricultural center in the ruins of the main settlement. You can come alone, or you can bring your entire army. It will not matter." The message was short, simple, and completely impossible. Their communication systems were protected by technology that no human should have been able to understand, let alone hack. Yet there it was, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. Kethvor's mandibles clicked together in rage. This primitive human had humiliated his perfect soldiers for days, and now he had the audacity to issue a personal challenge. The Admiral's enhanced brain, designed for tactical superiority, was overwhelmed by pure alien pride. "Prepare my personal transport," he ordered his aide. "Assemble the elite guard. We will end this mockery once and for all." His officers exchanged worried glances. Military doctrine clearly stated that commanders should never expose themselves to unnecessary risks. But their admiral was beyond listening to logical advice. The human had wounded his pride, and pride demanded personal satisfaction. 20 minutes later, Kethvor descended to New Sol's surface with his 12 most elite bodyguards. These were not ordinary Apex Legion soldiers. Each guard had been enhanced beyond even the normal standards, with reflexes faster than thought and armor that could stop weapons powerful enough to destroy buildings. They found Kim Dae exactly where he said he would be, standing in the center of what had once been the colony's main greenhouse. The building had been partially destroyed by orbital bombardment, but the basic structure still stood. Broken glass crunched under their feet as the alien soldiers spread out in perfect formation. The human appeared to be completely unarmed and utterly defenseless. He wore simple farming clothes and stood with his hands empty at his sides. There was no cover nearby, no obvious escape route, no sign of hidden weapons or traps. Admiral Kethvor stepped forward, his translator converting his words into human language. "I am Admiral Kethvor of the Vorthak Empire, commander of the Apex Legion. Colonel Vrexton failed in his duty, so I have come to finish what he started. Surrender now, and your death will be quick and painless." Kim Dae looked at the alien commander with calm, steady eyes. "My name is Kim Dae," he replied in a quiet voice. "I grow vegetables here. Well, I used to grow vegetables before you destroyed my farm." Then he smiled, and that smile made several of the elite guards suddenly feel very nervous. "Let's get this over with," Dae said simply. What happened next lasted exactly 17 minutes, and it would be discussed in Vorthak military academies for generations to come. The greenhouse that looked empty and harmless had been transformed into the most sophisticated battlefield trap ever created. Dae had spent 3 days preparing for this moment, using salvaged alien technology combined with ordinary farming equipment in ways that no enhanced alien intellect could have predicted. Mirrors and pieces of broken glass had been positioned to create blinding flashes of redirected sunlight at precisely the right moments. The old irrigation system had been modified to spray a mixture of water and alien energy cell fluid that conducted electricity in unexpected ways. Farming tools hanging from the ceiling had been rigged to swing down like deadly pendulums when triggered by nearly invisible wires. But the real genius was not in any single trap. It was in how they all worked together, each one designed to force the aliens to move in specific directions that led them into the next trap. Dae had studied their enhanced reflexes and programmed responses, learning to predict exactly how they would react to each threat. The elite guards, for all their genetic perfection, moved like machines following their programming. When threatened from the right, they always dodged left. When attacked from above, they always rolled forward. When their enhanced senses detected movement, they always turned toward it. Kim Dae had spent 15 years learning every detail of this greenhouse, and 3 days turning that knowledge into a weapon more deadly than any gun or bomb. When the battle ended, Admiral Kethvor lay unconscious on the floor, his elite guards scattered around him in various states of defeat. Not one of them had been killed, Dae had been very careful about that, but their supposedly perfect formations had been completely shattered. As the Admiral slowly regained consciousness, he heard the human's voice speaking quietly into his personal recording device. "You came here thinking we were savage because we fight wars," Dae said, his words being permanently recorded in the Admiral's memory banks. "But you misunderstood what makes us dangerous. We are not warriors because we love to fight. We are warriors because we love what we are fighting for. And as long as we have something to protect, we will always find a way to protect it." 3 days later, the entire Vorthak fleet departed from New Sol's orbit. Admiral Kethvor's final report to the Empire was brief and devastating. He recommended immediate cessation of all hostilities with Earth, not because humans were too strong to defeat, but because they were too human to understand. As supporting evidence, he transmitted Kim Dae's agricultural records, 15 years of detailed documentation showing how one man had transformed barren soil into fertile farmland that fed thousands of people. "They do not just adapt to survive," the Admiral wrote in his conclusion. "They make everything around them better, including themselves. We can defeat human armies with superior technology and genetic enhancement. But we cannot defeat the human spirit. That is something that cannot be conquered by any weapon we possess." Back on the surface of New Sol, Kim Dae stood among the ruins of his farm with Lee Minute and the other 22 survivors. The crops were gone, the buildings destroyed, but they were alive. And humans, he had learned long ago, could rebuild anything as long as they were alive to do it. "So," Lee Minute asked as she looked at the bombed fields around them, "what do we plant first?" Dae knelt down and picked up a handful of soil, feeling its potential between his fingers. Despite everything that had happened, the earth was still good. It would grow anything they gave it the chance to grow. "Everything," he said quietly, and his voice carried the promise of new beginnings. "We grow everything."